Welcome, everybody. See that we're getting everybody brought in. While everybody's getting connected here, I just kind of want to welcome you all to the Power Users group this month, and state that we're going to be going across some SharePoint site types. Looks like we've got a majority of the group in, so we're going to move right along here. So, first of all, just kind of want to reiterate the welcome again, but kind of give you just some rules of the meeting if possible. So number one, prefer to have everybody muted all the time if possible. We may go in and mute you if necessary. The premise behind this is just helps us get a good recording, and also it just makes it an enjoyable experience for everybody. Hey, feel free to ask questions on this kind of stuff. They're going to come up if hey, I didn't quite understand that, or you want some clarity. Make sure you either use the chat or the raise hand functionality. We'll be monitoring all of that, and we'll engage you as necessary. And then this time we don't have any polls really in there, but in future sessions we have had future and past sessions we've had polls in there. This time I don't really have anything to take a poll on, but in the future, if you see them, make sure you engage with us on the polls. So before we go too far here, I just kind of want to give you kind of an overview. A lot of people think because of sessions like this, they think Mytech is a training company, but we aren't. Really, Mytech is a business and technology consultancy that really focuses on the small to medium-sized organizations. And over the last 20 years, we've kind of developed this proven IT strategy that helps organizations remove their IT challenges and get more value and productivity out of their IT investments. When we do all of that and everything is working the way we expect, that gives you the capability of actually getting, focusing on your clients instead of your IT problems and getting more out of what you do and making your clients happier. So that said, what are we going to learn about today? Or I should say, who is a power user? So what is the purpose of these meetings and why do we have power users? Power users aren't necessarily system administrators. They aren't somebody that makes the final decisions in the organization, but they really are a key member of the organization and what they do. They drive adoption inside the group. They really understand, by attending programs like this, they understand the pros and cons of things that of what kinds of actions they need to take in their organization. They also understand the needs of the organization. They understand what to do, what not to do. They understand what the organization needs and why they should be taking certain actions. And then they help them lead the IT decisions. So really, there's somebody, if we think about like the Microsoft Teams environment, there's somebody who will most likely be entrusted with the ability to create teams for their organization, but not necessarily to do all the sysadmin type functions. So just to kind of put this in premise, we aren't going to get super deep into the sysadmin type of things, but when we start talking about stuff, we're going to talk about the pros and cons and what this means, so that when somebody says, I need to do this in your organization, we really can help you. So what does that mean for somebody for like today? So when we talk about this, today's agenda, we're going to be talking about SharePoint sites. So we're going to recap a little bit of the last couple months, just kind of, they help build into what we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to talk about the types of SharePoint sites. We're going to be talking about the security around them and how we can use the built-in functionality to actually tie some of those sites together and consolidate the action and get some more out of it. So recap of last month. So last month we talked about how Microsoft Teams and SharePoint store files, right? We learned that they're basically, files are basically a record in a database, which means that we can add additional data to that, so we can have metadata associated with it. We also learned that Teams stores its files. So if you're in a Teams team, it stores your files in SharePoint. And if you use files inside of a chat, you're storing it in OneDrive of the person sharing the data. And we also learned that like OneDrive is more than just the service of storing your files, but it's also an app that you can use on your desktop to be able to synchronize both SharePoint and OneDrive data down to your desktop. A couple months ago, we learned about the infrastructure of Teams, and that SharePoint is a key component of this. But we also learned about O365 groups. And I want to bring this up because of two things. Number one, Microsoft has changed the name of it. So they are no longer called O365 groups. They are now called Microsoft 365 groups. So yippee skippy on that kind of thing. But we are also going to be talking about that today because that actually does play into much of the SharePoint security as we talk about it also. Just to kind of give everybody a clue as to what we're looking at here. So in Microsoft 365, the whole suite of things, there are multiple products, multiple licensing factors, multiple everything else. We are going to be talking about SharePoint Online exclusively today. And so SharePoint Online is really going to have the, just kind of showing you that it fills the gap across all the sections. If you have a license to 365, you are going to have a license to these functions and to be able to engage on these components. So starting off, what's a SharePoint site? Well, a SharePoint site is a website, right? It's basically a central storage repository. It runs on the SharePoint platform. The SharePoint platform is a very diverse and powerful platform that really does get into a lot of document storage. It's for lack of better terms, I actually like to think of it as a database. It really is a, every website, every web page is basically just a series of records that get stored in the background. It's got a lot of features tied to it. It's got a lot of functionality, and it can change depending upon how you're using it. So if we look at it in this scenario, hey, Microsoft Teams, if I create a Microsoft Teams team, also associated with that Microsoft 365 group, it has an associated SharePoint site. So that is the functionality that runs that team. It stores the files for it. It gives a collaboration space for it. It kind of provides that backbone that's really necessary in order for teams to operate in the way that you would expect it to. So now that we know what a team site is, how do we manage this, right? There has to be some admin roles around this. And so global admins is probably the big thing. This is your sysadmin role, right? That's the group that has control and access over everything inside of your 365 platform. There's also a SharePoint admin role, so we can actually delegate down certain aspects of this global admin role down to certain functions. One of those functions is SharePoint, so we can actually provide SharePoint rights down to an individual user or a group of users, so that they can have administrative functions to only SharePoint. We also have Microsoft 365 group owners. We talked about earlier how we have Microsoft 365 ties into this. Well, a Microsoft 365 group owner, if SharePoint is tied to that group, then the owner becomes an admin of that SharePoint site. So kind of a big deal for that. And then standard users. Why did I include standard users in admin roles? Well, that's because standard users can create a SharePoint site. By default, this is one of those big catch-22s. By default, any user can create a SharePoint site. A lot of people don't even realize that they can, luckily. But if we look at what a default user would see, if they go to the SharePoint section of their Office portal, they will actually have a Create Site button. Now, as an admin, so the SharePoint admin or a global admin has the rights to go in and set a global setting that turns off that capability, but that is something you need to make sure you're aware of, because that functionality can be kind of dangerous, especially as you start trying to explore and getting more people involved in your organization in SharePoint. So those are global permissions, but we also have site permissions. So when we actually go into a site, we can actually limit the access within a site. So we have multiple tiers of access to this. We have everything from a view-only site visitor. So they are somebody who can come in and just see the data inside there, but they can't really engage with much of it. They can't edit anything. They can't, even certain file types they can't open, but they do exist out inside that system, all the way up to a site admin, which is basically got the same levels on permissions as a global admin does in SharePoint, but exclusively for that site. So if we look at a site admin, they have the capabilities of looking at that full permission to everything. They can also assign owners. This is kind of one of those unique areas is, well, isn't an admin an owner and isn't an owner an admin? It is really similar, but a site admin can actually be an admin without being an owner, but they will have access to everything. They also have additional features like the recycle bin. So SharePoint does have a recovery capability or a recycle bin associated with things. And they also do have access to what's called site collections. We won't get into some of those. Those are some pretty advanced technology terms or advanced technologies inside SharePoint that we'll probably cover in a later session. Site owners, they have basically full access to the site. They can modify and edit anything. They can also change permissions of the site. And many times, if it's a Microsoft 365 group, they will have administrative access to, or if you're the owner of the Microsoft 365 group, you will be the owner of the site also. So that just kind of works back and forth, and we'll show you, we'll get into a demo a little bit later where we actually show you how that actually gets tied together. Site members have the ability to edit. So they have the ability to add documents, delete documents, modify documents, add pages, add objects to it. So they can do anything that's kind of an operational state inside there, but they can't really set any permissions necessarily. They're strictly around kind of the use of the site. Now, if that group is also tied to a 365 group, this is tying to that also. And can be organized through that and controlled from the same area. And then down to that site, these are read-only. They only can come in and see the pages. You can also lock them out very easily from being able to even open documents or check anything out. By default, they don't have the ability to download files or do anything like that. They can only see basically published web pages. So definitely one of those areas that if you're trying to create a read-only set of data for somebody, maybe policies, this would be the way that you would actually do that, is you'd make everybody site visitors and then they can't really change your policies. Types of sites. So when we go in to create a site, there are going to be a couple of different sites that we can create. There are modern team sites, which are designed to interface with Microsoft Teams, Planner, Stream, all of that kind of stuff. And then we have classic sites. And classic sites have a little bit more legacy SharePoint security structures. They also have the capability of having legacy compatibility, so they can also work with SharePoint 2013 templates. And then there's actually a whole bunch of additional template styles that kind of come from those legacy formats that exist only in the classic sites. So two of the primary site types that you kind of get slapped in the face with as you work forward is a team site and a communication site. The difference between the two of them is who can create that site and how it looks and how it integrates. So if we look at a team site, basically anybody who has the ability to create a team or an O365 group has the ability to create a team site and will create one if they create one of those groups essentially. So they create the groups and it strictly uses that security. You will see some things around the way navigation works. Navigation's on the left side versus on the top. There's some different options that you can get where you also get additional features where you can get you can add in OneNote and email addresses and all the things that you would normally see in a Teams site that only exists on a Teams site, Teams SharePoint site. A communications SharePoint site gives you much of the same look, but it is a little bit different where security is actually controlled instead of by those 365 groups, they're actually controlled by SharePoint groups. You can't have those same integrations that you would have from Planner or OneNote. It's strictly communication, so it's strictly SharePoint, but that does give you some other advantages. So by breaking those ties, you have a little bit more flexibility around security. You can get a little more granular. You can actually set up, people can modify certain types of documents versus other types of documents. You can also control file libraries a lot better, where if you're doing it in 365, basically applying that security group applies it across the board for SharePoint. So that kind of helps you out. But we also talked about communication site also has a lot of classic style or legacy style templates. And this is just a list of basically the templates out of the system that are built in from Microsoft. And there are also additional ones that you can go out there and get. So you can see that there's a lot of different formats that you can put into place, whether they be document centers for doing document management and strictly nothing but documents. They really don't have any way of blogging or communicating additional data. They only store documents. To compliance policies, which have very strong read-only, check-in, check-out kind of revisioning controls. Publishing portals that are meant to be one-way communication, so a lot of publishing out of information, but only that information. So a lot of web page design around that, and then even down to just standard blog type formats. So being able to have that constant communication in kind of an informal format of like a blog. So a lot of these do exist. They still work just fine inside the platform. They're just kind of a little bit of an extra step to configure and set up. So when we talk about all these sites, we start building all the sites, we start building out our structure, but each of these sites is kind of their own little world. How do we start putting them together? Well, this is where Microsoft has come together with something called hub sites. And a hub site is a site that starts combining multiple sites together. So if we start thinking about this in the scenario represented here in the image, we have an HR hub. And HR is not just HR. Many times, especially in larger organizations, it's multiple, almost smaller departments. You have a payroll group. You have professional development, hiring. You have benefits. You have all of those kinds of different areas. How do you combine all of that communication into one central function? And that's what a hub site is really designed for. They used to have functionality called subsites. It still does exist, but Microsoft really is defining that this format should be replacing that. It kind of fixes some of the issues that happen around subsites. And then also the other thing to think about this is not thinking necessarily about departments, but about information. What is, if you are a staff member in your company, how would you find the information you're looking for? So it's kind of a different way of thinking. It might be that you have one hub site for your whole company, and then from there you can flow down into all the other areas. So why would you use hub sites? Well, hub sites actually provide you with a shared navigation. So once you go into that hub site, you'll actually be able to navigate down to other sites that you have access to. That's a key piece, is that access is secured by the subsites or by the member sites. So if you don't have access to it, you aren't going to see the data from it, and you aren't going to be able to access that site, even though it might show up in your navigation. You can also push down themes. So as an organization, if you come up with a color scheme, a layout, language, all of that kind of stuff, that hub site can actually get pushed down, and it will take effect on all of your subsites also. You can also search across all those sites. Search makes it scary because it makes you think, I'm going to see something inside of another site that I shouldn't have access to. SharePoint search actually does look at who is logged in, and it only gives you the results that are tied to who you're talking or who you are. So if you don't have access to a document or a result, it doesn't actually display that for you. So that search across sites only going to show you the results that you have access to. But it does give you the ability, like in that HR example, to say, I want information about a vacation policy, and it will tell you, it will give you the policy, it will give you the information about, how to file for it, how to request it, how it gets paid out from all of those different subsites. And it also can roll up a lot of this data too. So if you do have teams that are blogging or posting updates, doing anything like that, you can also do, if you have teams that are publishing events in SharePoint, all of that can get rolled up into that hub site and kind of come together. So I do see that we have a question here from Angie about, can we have hub site within a hub site? And no, you can't. Hub sites have to be a top level, and you can have multiple hub sites inside of your organization, and a child site can only be a member of one hub site. So kind of still have to think through that, but there is kind of this process as to how that would actually come together for you. But yeah, unfortunately, you cannot have a hub of a hub, at least not yet. So, that always changes. Okay. Now that we've kind of gone through some of that stuff, I'm going to give you guys a demo here. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I'm going to share. I'm going to share this. Hopefully everybody can see this okay. So here's what I've got is I've got a web browser that I've signed into the Microsoft portal. And in this scenario, I've actually gone to the admin center. And this is kind of the sysadmin level of functions. Well, when I'm in the admin center, I want to kind of show you how we're talking about being able to delegate down these permissions that we would do. So if I take the standard user here, I can go here to roles, and in roles, I can actually make him an admin of SharePoint. And by doing that, I give this person access to the full fundamental or the full admin center for SharePoint. So they will get this same admin center, but they won't get access to any of this data. I'm not going to save this because I don't want to change this user. But when they do this, they will get strictly a SharePoint admin page. And when they click on that SharePoint admin page, they're going to go to this screen here. So this is our SharePoint Center. And the SharePoint Center is going to give us information about everything that's going on inside there. We can also see what kinds of things are coming out, all those kinds of actions. But we can also go in here and we can see all of the sites that are associated with this. When we see all of these sites, just because I see them doesn't mean I have access to them. So let me give you an example of something like this. If I created this new site here earlier, and I actually excluded myself from being an owner. So if I go to this site, I'm actually going to go to the permissions, and you can see I'm not an admin or not an owner of this site. And so by not being an admin or an owner of this, even though I have administrative access to the site, I cannot go to the site. So if I go to try to review any of that data, I do not have access to it. So by default, I have to go take an action to go see this information. So by default, this kind of shows you what that security is like. Even though I'm an admin, I don't have access to everything by default. So I'm going to go into this site. I'm actually going to go back into the permissions, and I'm going to manage these, and I'm going to give myself admin rights. So now I am becoming a site admin here. Now a site admin, and now when I try to go to the site, you can see that I have access to the site. Now this is a communication page. This is one of the pages that we talked about. And you can see that by having a communication page, we have our navigation across the top. And it is very much formatted to be a very, by default, the template is very elegant and designed to be a very much a communication type format and not something that's tactical and user friendly, if that makes sense. Definitely meant to be publishing information. So that's how we can gain those access controls. If I am let's say I am a owner of this site now, and I want to make additional publication changes. You can see I also have this little gear icon up here. By going to this gear icon, I can go in here and I can say site permissions. And because I'm an owner of this site, I can actually change permissions around this, and I can actually say who has access to different components of this. So I can say I want to share this site, and I can type in add Stephanie here. I could also add a group of users if I wanted to, and I can state what kind of rights I want to have her have. So I can say that she has the capability of editing. I can send her an email if I want to, or I don't have to, and I can say add, and this will add her rights to the capability. So you'll actually see her now underneath members. So we can do that. We also have the capability of doing all sorts of other things like site designs, changing the look. We can add pages. We can add applications to this, all designed through this setting page. And I can do that as an owner or as a site admin. Now, one of the things that we also talked about was the difference between a Teams site and a non-Teams site. So this was a non-Teams site, and you can see that those permissions that we saw, I could actually modify those on a role type basis. So I could say somebody could edit or delete that data. What I'm going to do in this case is I'm actually going to pull up one of our Teams sites. So this site came actually from, this was created by us creating a Microsoft team. And when we do this, I'm going to go into here and I'm going to look at the permissions for what this one looks like. And you can see that I have group owner still, but the site admins are the same as are my Office 365 group owners. And so because of that, oh, didn't want to click on that. We have our, you can see that this is controlled by that Microsoft 365 group. When we look at this, I also have site owners. If I look at the site owners, it's actually tied to the group and I can't modify this. The group is exclusively set up to be the type of owner. So both my owners and members are tied to the groups, both the sales team members and the sales team's owners, and I can't really change that. I also can't have visitors associated with this because of the team site structure. You can kind of do some workarounds to make this happen, but the design of it is that it's not really supposed to happen that way. So what's really funny about this, though, is even though this is controlled by an O365 group, I can still have an additional admin associated with it. So this is a SharePoint role that I can assign. So I could actually assign myself admin access to this. And what this will do is this is not going to modify the O365 group at all, but it gives me admin access to the site. So kind of a difference as to what can be done, but definitely some power. So this only gives me the access to modify and change things on the SharePoint side. I can't change anything inside Teams, inside anything else that's associated with that O365 group.
Hey, Gerald, we do have a hand raised. Don, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, is it possible to change the 365 group that owns the SharePoint site after the fact via PowerShell or something?
It might be. I can't say that I've tried to do that. Offhand, I would say because of all the other integrations, I would probably recommend just by default rebuilding the team and starting from scratch again. If that's, depending upon the scenario you're talking about. I think that there's a lot of there's just so much integration that happens with O365 groups. I would be worried you might be able to change just the SharePoint side, but I don't know that it's going to change everything necessary. I don't even know if it's possible. I think that's probably an area of question still. Okay. So creating a team or creating a site is really easy. We have the create button up here. If I click on this create button, I can add different types of sites. Maybe I want to start off with creating a new site for housing our communication hub in this scenario. So I'm going to actually create a new one. And I have a few different designs that I can set. So I can either set a blank one where I have to do all of the work. I can also choose from Showcase, which kind of gave us that look that we had earlier, or a topical design, which kind of gives you some just a slightly different look of that. I'm just going to choose the topical one, and I'm going to call this so I can give it a name. We also have the site address. So we actually have two different locations that we can store this, either in sites or in Teams. By default, I recommend using sites, and that's kind of a Microsoft standard. Teams is really designed for Teams style data, but the sites will work good for us. It's automatically going to fill in a name based upon the name that we set. But if I did not like the Team Hub site name, I can actually change this, and maybe I want to change it to so that the URL is THS. Maybe it just makes it that much easier and faster to get to that. I can see the preview of what the URL would look like that I'd access. This M365X, this would be your tenant ID. So this is, in the case of like Mytech, it's Mytech Partners. So it's going to be unique to your organization. And then site owner, this is the person or people that you want to have ownership rights to it. If there's a default language, then we do have a few extra settings, like what is the default time zone, and then if we want to put a description in here, we can. So when I do this, I'm going to build my site. And then we started talking about making this a hub site, right? So I have my team hub site down here. Uncheck this one. I can go up here to hub, and I can say I'm going to register this as a hub site. I'm going to give myself the capability of associating with that. And give Nathan Austin access to that also. So the two of us can associate people to that hub site. So this is now a hub site. So if I go into this, we should be able to see that this is hub associations. This is the hub site. And then we probably want to associate actual sites with our hub site. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to associate the team site to this. I can go to hub here and I can register or associate with a hub. And when I do this, it's going to ask me what hub site I want. I can say just like that. And now the capabilities and the data flow from sales are going to go to my hub site. So updates, communication are all going to get centralized and consolidated in the team hub site. So definitely some cool stuff that you can do with that. The neat part of this is if I wanted to, I could register this as this new communication site as a hub site also. So I'm going to register this as a hub site. And now that this is a hub site also, so you can see I have two hub sites in here. Maybe sales doesn't work so good underneath the team hub site. Maybe it needs to be underneath this new communication site. What I can do is I can actually go here and I can actually modify its hub association. So right now it's tied to the team hub site. I can actually change this to the new communication site. So when you really think of how your organization changes and morphs over time, this allows you the capabilities of being able to move that data around and change those associations, which is not really possible when you deal with a lot of the older technologies or the sub-site format that they used to have. Once you built a sub-site, it was always in that site. So if you always had, maybe finance as part of the administration function, and then it actually splits off to be its own group, you can actually make those changes when you deal with hub sites. But if you're dealing with sub-sites, you can't break that information out. You have to recreate it all, which would not be fun in my opinion. So definitely a structure as to how we can do this. Okay. That's the primary of my demo here. So I'm going to stop sharing this one and go back to.
Hey, Gerald, didn't look like it, but so you cannot have two sites associated with a hub. You can't, for instance, sales couldn't be part of the new communication site and the other hub site. It only can be.
Correct. Yep. It is a 1-to-1 transaction, so it can only be part of one. So yeah, at least at this current point in time, that is exactly what the limitation is.
Is there any like best practices around, for instance, when you were talking about communication sites versus team sites? So I know here at Mytech, we have, some teams that are cross-functional, meaning we've got members from different Microsoft 360 groups coming together into a team. Is there like a best practice that should be always created as a communication site, or can you talk a little bit about that?
I think the big thing that would be beneficial is if it is a collaboration type thing, then a team site is the appropriate methodology. That is the premise of that is you have people that are in charge of that team and the collaboration of that, but then you also have members that should just gain access to be part of that collaboration stack. So much in the same thought process of what defines a Microsoft Teams team, I should say, is that exact same process in this. Most of the time, if you're building a team site, you are actually building it inside Microsoft SharePoint or inside Microsoft Teams. And that would probably be the most logical way to do it, is that's going to build all of your other structures also, just like what it's going to do inside the scenario of building it inside SharePoint. It's just that methodology of doing it out on that, doing it out in the in Teams that's the native methodology that you're going to use it in. I haven't really thought of a reason why you would want to build a SharePoint site that is a team that isn't actually tied to Microsoft Teams. Most of the time, you're going to want that interface of Teams to be able to make it productive. Communication, on the other hand, is all about publishing information out. So it's I have heard of groups that while doing research for like this session, I was reading about organizations that actually do a communication team for every team that they set up. So every SharePoint site team that they set up, they actually also do a communication site. And the reason for that is that team that is working needs a way to publish that information out to the rest of the organization. And they use that communication site to actually publish that information out. So kind of an interesting way of being able to do that, and kind of a unique approach, but it shows the flexibility of how this could work, right? That doesn't fit everybody's business cycles or lifestyle, but it fit theirs, being a creative group. It really made a lot of sense as to how they can use it. So it shows the power behind what can be set up if necessary. Okay, what did you hopefully walk away with today? You learned about SharePoint admin rights. You figured out what kind of roles you need in order to manage things. We learned about the different kinds of templates. Figured out that hub sites could be really powerful inside of an environment. And then we also learned how the security around SharePoint data is per user, per structure, and how we can actually limit a lot of those kinds of actions. I want to open this up for additional questions if anybody has any. I also want to point out our next power user session is August 6th, same time, same channel. Next time we're going to be talking about SharePoint page editing. So we're going to go through the web parts, talk about how to take a lot of those communication pages that we just showed you and actually make something of them and actually use them up. mytech.com/events will give you the sign up options for that. Stephanie is nodding that she has posted it, so it should all be good. Any questions that I can answer?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself or post it into the chat and or raise your hand if you've got questions or something you'd like Gerald to demonstrate. And while we're waiting for any questions, I'm going to go ahead and post. I will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the next events to register, so keep an eye out for that. In there is also a survey. We just asked that if you could take a minute, I'm going to post it here in the chat too. So if you want to take the survey right now, you could go ahead. Just kind of asking about even future topics that you want to learn about. These sessions, we develop them based on your feedback. So please let us know the topics that you're interested in and give us any feedback so we can continue to evolve and make these better. So with that said, anybody have any questions? Here we got one, Gerald.
I go over the search functionality between cross-site versus a hub site. Okay, so the search functionality of a hub site. So if I search in a hub site, it's going to also search all the child sites of that subsite. So it's going to also any site that is associated with that. If you have permissions to read data from that site, you are going to search across that also. So in the scenario that we had where we had like HR in that structure, if we actually go through this, we can actually, if I search the HR hub site, I'd also get the information from maybe payrolls associated site and the policy associated site, maybe the hiring HR associated site. I'd get those results if I have access to those subsites. If I go into those associated sites themselves and do searches, I'm only going to see the data for that site. I'm not actually going to be able to see it above. Now, a lot of people have also asked about, well, what's the difference between that and there is a kind of a global search that you can do in SharePoint. That's going to search across all of the data that you have access to. And it may give you the same results, but it doesn't necessarily give you that same area of focus around what you're looking for. So one of the things that I've see as a constant reoccurring theme is not having the not thinking of hub sites in the idea of departments, but thinking of hub sites in the methodology of what kind of data would somebody be looking for, and being able to think about your organization's data flow and not as in departments or teams or anything like that. So hopefully that answers your question, Angie.
I think Don Morgan was next. His hand was raised.
Okay, and Don, you want to?
Yeah, so as far as backups go, is SharePoint just backed up by, wow, what's our product? The America 365 or whatever backup that Mytech uses? Yep.
So this opens up a very good question. What in SharePoint is backed up? By default, Microsoft 365, while a very highly resilient program, is not backed up, right? So there is no data backup. there are a lot of data protections in place, but there's ways to still lose data inside the scenario. So we do recommend and provide a lot of our clients with a 365 backup package that does get backed up in the scenario of our stuff. Our backup package does back up SharePoint data and the web pages and all that kind of stuff. So it is a recommended option. Say that again.
Is there versioning inside of SharePoint for like similar to shadow copies or previous versions?
Yep. So there is versioning inside of SharePoint around files and data types. Most of that is restorable. That does require access to like the recycle bin in order to see that.
Okay.
So yes, there is some revision control around that. Say that again.
Is that enabled by default?
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
Yep.
Awesome. And then there was one in the chat by Mark. Do you see that one?
Yep. Best way to use SharePoint sites as pure data store file shares. To replace a standard file server. This is this is a fun conversation. So best way to use SharePoint as sites as a data repository. So if you're strictly looking for it to only do files, the best way to do this, I'm actually going to reshare my admin screen here, and I'll show you what this looks like, because I think this would be a worthwhile one to have. So I'm going to just create one of these other options here. This is going to be one of those other templates. I'm going to say more templates here. Oh, I guess Document Center was listed there. But I'm just going to show you how this other templates area works. So these are going to be all of the more of the legacy style templates that we're going to look at. And if I look at this and I go to the enterprise section, this is where we can actually build the Document Center. And the Document Center is really meant to be the site management or the document management platform. I'm just going to build a site here. You notice that this interface is a little bit different than what we've had in other interfaces. And that's because this interface is more of the true SharePoint admin interface. This is why we can also say resource quotas. So we can actually, by default, associate limits to how much storage space that we have. So we have 2,600 units, and I believe that is, I'm trying to think of how that actually goes. It's not megabytes, but it's something similar to that. Anyways, we can say how much resource we want to allow for this site to be able to be hosted, and we'll create OK. Okay, so now by doing that, I should have my new docs page in here. Oops. Just going to refresh this page. So everything's going to take extra long to come up today. Boy, system is not liking me today. So, but normally that's how you would go through that. It might It might just be because of the historic template. It might just be taking a little bit longer than normal to build, but it should be showing up inside of here. And when it does, that would actually give us that information. And if we went to that site, you would actually see that that site is mostly designed strictly around basically a document library. That's all it really shows. It doesn't have any additional pages for things. It's just a document library that shows up as a big screen. So kind of definitely focused around that side of things. Doesn't really give you any other fancy controls by default. So I couldn't show you exactly, Mark, what it looks like, but hopefully that helps you out.
Anybody else? Questions? Feel free to raise your hand, post, or unmute. Just unmute your mic as well if you had a question. All right. Well, with Nate Austin's absence, I feel like that was a long enough awkward pause since he loves the awkward pauses. All right. Yeah, just be on the lookout for the follow-up email then. We did record today's session, so that will be posted as well. And along with, you'll see the previous recording. So anything else you want to share, Gerald, before we sign off?
Nope. I appreciate everybody coming and hopefully get to see you at the next one.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Gerald.